Greetings, sim pilots and crew. This is going to be a down and dirty power-up from Cold and Dark of the Zibo Boeing 737-800 model. This video is basically the video I wanted to see when I first got the Zibo. I got back to flight sim from a much older sim where basically you hit on and the thing ran. So now that things have gotten much more complicated and realistic, I figured we should have a video to walk a beginner through. So if you are looking for something a little more technical, there's a couple thousand other videos on the internet, but my intent with this video is that you can hit play, listen to me guide you through the cockpit. I'll describe each area and the switches you'll be throwing to power up and start the engines. We are going to skip one thing. We're not really going to set up our flight computer for an actual flight, because that's not the intent of this video and I don't want to slow us down too much. So, first thing you're going to need is your sim on, and then we're going to need some preset viewpoints. If you haven't already set viewpoints, it's very simple. You're going to hold down the control key and tap a number on the number pad of your keyboard. That will lock that view to that key. So you would simply hit 1 to go to whatever view you set for 1. So I've set 1 to be my pilot's view. I like to back it up a little from the standard view X-Plane has. I've set my 2 to be the CDU, which some people call the FMC. Personally, I bounce back and forth. If you're not familiar with that, look down from the main panel about where your right knee is. That small computer-like device is our CDU. I've set that to viewpoint 2. Let's look up above to our overhead panel. I've set this to be viewpoint 3. I've backed it out so I can see everything from the bottom with engine starters and lights, the whole way up to just about the top, right where the brake would occur to go to the upper overhead panel. Viewpoint 4 I've got set to the lower panel, which is also called the pedestal at times. That's pretty much everything between you and the co-pilot behind the throttle. Alright, once you've got viewpoints set, I can talk you through this, and I'm going to wait a few seconds after each item to give you time to find it and try and keep up. Alright, so here we are sitting in our Zibo. Power's off, nothing's running, also known as cold and dark. I'm going to look overhead. On the overhead panel, we've got 4 rows and a skinny middle row. In the second row from the left, coming down under a blacked out display screen, you're going to see 2 knobs, and then to the left under the left hand knob we've got a switch labeled bat. Turn on bat, click on the little black guard to cover it. The switch above the bat in the second panel, we're going to click it up 2 clicks to the right to point to bat, and now in our electrical panel you can see I'm drawing 5.9 DC amps. This is kind of an issue because the plane is not going to operate that well on DC, so we need to get ourselves some more power. I'm going to go back to my main view and then look to my left. The electronic flight bag or iPad type device that Avatab has added is going to control a lot of things. We're going to look here frequently. So on our EFB pad, click Ground Services. In the Ground Services menu, you're going to click Connect GPU. Once you've connected GPU, look back up to your overhead panel. On the overhead panel, in the second row from the left, looking down kind of the lower area, you'll see a bunch of blue lights illuminated. The one all by itself in the middle of that second row says GRD power off, and the blue says GRD power available. Click that switch down. Ground power has now been initialized, and we're now ready to get things started for real. Scroll your viewpoint up past the overhead panel to the upper overhead panel. Basically straight on up from where we were just looking with the batteries. We've got on our far left some flap indicators for running tests. We don't need that right now. In the second row of the upper overhead panel, the top is IRS display, and the lower part of that is the IRS alignment knobs. on those two IRS alignment knobs, click them to the right to nav. When both are to nav, you'll see for a moment an on DC orange light, and that will switch over to align. If we had not connected ground power, they would not align, and the on DC would have not gone away. Now that those are aligning, let's go back down to our main view. You'll notice on our primary flight display, the left little screen on the panel, and our navigation display, the EHSI right-hand screen, they're both basically blanked out. We've got some things there, but those will kick in when our nav is aligned from the IRS above. So you can look up there. There's a way to see the time. We can just wait for those to kick in. Alright, next, back to our overhead panel. On the bottom of the overhead panel is a skinny strip. On that skinny strip at the bottom, we have our landing lights, our taxi lights, our APU power, 2 engine start knobs, and on the far right is all of our other lights. So let's stick on the far right. The second set of lights from the left is position lights. Click it down to steady. Later, when you're ready to take off, you'll click it 2 clicks up to strobe. For now, you just want steady. Alright, we're going to do a little bit of a flow here just to get everything basically ready. So staying on the overhead panel, let's look at row 1 from the top to the bottom. Scrolling down, we see low pressure lights. You can ignore that. There's an orange yaw damper light. Click the yaw damper switch to on. The light will extinguish. Scrolling down, we've got fuel pumps. We can turn those on now. There's not really a need to wait. I'm not going to be using my center pumps because I have no fuel in the center tank. Okay, looking back up so I can see my second column. We've already got our battery on and our bus is set to ground power, so we don't need that at the moment. In the middle skinny row, we've got circuit breaker lights. I'm going to ignore that. I've never had a circuit breaker issue in the sim. Below that is a panel brightness. Spin that up the whole way. Should you fly into darkness, you will not be able to read any of these without that. Sliding on down the skinny center, we've got emergency exit lights. Reach under the guard, click down to arm, close the guard. Below that is chimes, one of my favorite switches. Click chimes to auto, that wonderful ding. On the right, seat belts down to auto. Oh, clicking the wrong spot. Alright, that completes our skinny center section. In the third full column at the top, we have window heat. We do need those, so click on all 4 window heat switches. That center switch is not going to do anything here in the sim. Below it, the probe heats. We will come back for these. They are very important. All those orange lights are attached to that, but we're not going to do that till the engines are running. Continuing down the third row, we don't need any anti-ice at the moment. And then we come to our hydraulics. We've got 4 orange lights, but you only need to deal with these 2 center switches. Click electric 2 and electric 1 down. You should hear some humming start and the lights will extinguish. The other 2 hydraulic pumps will come on with the engines, and at that time those low pressure lights should go out, but for now those lights should stay on. Moving to the right hand 4th row of the overhead panel. Up at the top we have a temperature gauge. Right now it's reflecting the forward supply duct. I'm going to click this knob 2 to the right so we can see the passenger cabin temperature, just a little under 30 degrees Celsius. Wonderful Phoenix weather. Trim air, I'm going to click that to on. Scrolling down, we've got sort of a silvery section that's substantially lighter in this 4th panel row, and that is going to be all of our high pressure bleeds from the engines and the APU for starting, as well as running the cooling packs, the AC and heat. So just take note of where that is, because we're going to be looking up here a lot through the startup of the engines. And next below that, we've got two dials, one for flight altitude and another for landing altitude. This is the pressurization setting. I'm just going to pick an arbitrary but somewhat normal cruising altitude for 737 of 35,000 feet. If you do forget to set this, you're going to start to have problems around the time you climb through breathable atmosphere with the aircraft. So make sure you set the cruise altitude. Alright, let's go back down to the pilot's view. I'm going to get my yoke out of the way. You can either click on the center or hit Y on your keyboard. Behind the yoke, we've got a number of rheostats. Again, on the far left, it says main panel. Crank that up. We have panel backlighting. Look to your right where the autopilot, not the autopilot, the other pilot, our co-pilot sits. He also has a main panel brightness. You're going to want to turn that up so you can see his side as well. Back to our pilot's viewpoint, moving a little to the right of that main panel backlighting, you've got a background knob. Turn that up. It actually lights up the foreground of this panel. AFDS flood, that's going to be more the section up here where you've got your autopilot equipment on the MCP. So let's turn that up as well. Alright, next let's go to our center panel, or the lower panel in the pedestal. Right now its backlighting is off. So scroll the whole way to the bottom of that pedestal center. And you've got a flood, which is just a floodlight that shines down from the roof onto it. I don't tend to use that. And a panel light to the right. I also will crank that up. Alright, so at this point we are running on ground power. Our IRS is not quite aligned. Our overhead panel is basically set. The engines are off. And we're going to take 1 second to look at the CDU, or the FMC. Down there by your right hand knee, that little computer-like device. If you don't set this up, this is not particularly a viable plane. It is not really meant for VFR and just sort of fooling around. So if you actually want to do a flight, you're going to need to spend a little bit of time to input your origin, your destination, your route, as well as some performance data to make the autopilot function correctly. Without that, the plane can be started and hand flown, but that's really not realistic in any scenario I can imagine other than fooling around in this simulator. So, that being said, that's what we're doing, is fooling around in the simulator. So, let's start our engines. As you can see, we're just parked outside here, outside of T2 at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Let's look back to our overhead panel. We need to get some power, to start the engines, and we're going to do that with our APU. So in the lower section of the overhead panel, just slightly left of center, it says APU. Click it down twice. The first click takes you to on, the second click is down to start. I hold it for a few seconds while I see the exhaust gas temperature rising in the dial at the bottom of the second row. You can see that exhaust gas temperature rising there, and in a moment, above that EGT display, we should see the blue light for our APU come on. So earlier we had turned on in the second row our ground power, and just below it, and above this exhaust gas, in the center is the APU gen switches. We have two of them. When the APU is fully up to its speed, it will be ready to generate electricity as well as bleed air. So we're waiting for that blue light, and then we can transfer over. If you're impatient and really want to see how it's doing, we can go to the center forward display panels. If you click the system button in the center above those forward center display panels, you can get some other data here to see what's going on with your APU, and I believe we have some APU data here. Alright, I might be confusing this with some data from the 757. But either way, back to the overhead. Looks like our APU is ready. We've got the blue light, so let's click down on both switches. And now our ground power is off. You don't have to click off. The bus automatically kicks it off. We do need to go back to our EFB, little iPad thingy here. Click the home button, go to ground services, click disconnect GPU. In the external view, you will see the ground power unit has disappeared and is out of our way, so we can taxi out. You can also see the exhaust gas coming from the rear of the plane where the APU is located. Nice little effect. Alright, we are ready for an engine start. Let's go back inside. Look to your overhead panel. We're going to be back and forth between the overhead, the throttle quadrant, and the forward center panels because we need some engine information. So, first thing we're going to do on the fourth row, where you've got all of those bleed switches, that lighter area I told you to take note of earlier. In the bottom of that lighter area is the APU bleed. Turn on the APU bleed. Make sure the packs are off. That is the default of how this is starting. Look down to the bottom of the overhead panel in that skinny strip. Just above the compass here in the center, we've got two engine starters. We're going to start the right-hand engine, engine 2. Grab that left switch, turn it left to GRD for ground start engine 2. At this point, bleed air from the APU is starting to spool up engine 2, basically so that when we dump fuel in there and ignite it, it doesn't cook it. At this point, you need to look down to your forward center panels. In the lower display, which I need to click back to engine here, you can see the N2 is coming up. Oh, we're already well over the start point of 23. So we're going to grab below the throttle this silver tab labeled 2. It's currently at cutoff. You're going to pull it up to idle. That will start the fuel flow to the number 2 engine. If you go back to looking at the center panels, you will see the numbers starting to come up on the N1, the EGT. Those will begin to stabilize, and you may have heard a clicking sound. That was the kickback of the starter switch overhead. At this point, engine number 2 is stabilized and ready. We're going to look up again. Now we're going to grab engine number 1 starter switch. Click it left to GRD for ground start. Look back to your center forward panels. This time we'll actually try to watch that N2. We'll try and catch it at an appropriate point. I believe engine starts usually anywhere from 23 to 25% N2. So here we go. There's 23, 24. Alright, grabbing fuel cutoff number 1 below the throttle, lift it from cutoff to idle. That introduces the fuel. You'll see the exhaust gas temperature in the forward center panels start increasing. The N1 is starting to come up. You can expect it will stabilize at about the same point that engine number 2 is once it's been idling for a moment. I heard my kickback overhead, so looking back to our overhead panel, both starter switches in the bottom of the overhead panel have gone back to auto. For takeoff, those will be set to continuous, but we don't need it for now. In the fourth row, let's look back to those bleed switches. We're going to turn our packs to auto. I'm going to turn the isolation valve to auto. I'm going to take the APU bleed and set it to off. Moving over to the second row, back where we had our electrical bus connections. A few moments ago we turned on the APU generators, and now we're going to go to our engine generators. Both engines are running, so we'll click the far left one under the blue light. Blue light extinguishes, and we click the right. Blue light extinguishes. You'll notice the APU gen off bus blue light has come on because the APU is running, but it has now been automatically kicked off the bus. Looking underneath it, Down at the bottom of the skinny section, find your APU switch. You can now click it to off. Alright, there's one more item I want to grab here. In the third row of the overhead panel, up at our window heat switches, which have green on lights, we still have 8 orange caution lights. We need to turn on probe A and B. Once you've done that, let's take a quick glance. There are no more orange lights up here overhead. I believe everything is set appropriately. Let's look down to our main panel. We've skipped our FMC CDU, so that's not really set. In our pedestal, we haven't set any radios because, again, we're not doing an actual flight. But at this point, we have a powered up aircraft with the electrical systems appropriately set. You might notice that we still don't have a primary flight display or a navigation display in the window, so let's go up and check why that's not ready yet. I think I know. Going back to my upper overhead panel, at my align switches, you can see we're set to nav and we have a blinking align. Just for the sake of troubleshooting testing, if you look at the IRS display screen by this number pad, the top left knob there, this large section of the knob, you scroll the whole way to the right to HDG STS, that's a status switch, that would tell you how long it would take to set your alignment. Well, our alignment is set. That blink is a caution. Going back down to our main panel, I've got an IRS warning, and it's because you can't skip everything on this FMC CDU. So let's look at our FMC. It wants us to initialize our position. So looking down by your knee, or your virtual knee, the FMC CDU, the display screen should say FMC and ACARS. On the top left soft key, right where FMC is pointing, click that little button. Now got a startup page. On the right side of the screen, it says POS init for position initialization. Click the soft key on the bottom of the right-hand side. Now you can see our set IRS POS in the center of this display is all blanked out with squares. We need to get from the GPS that position, or we're not going to get a display. Looking down to the keypad, you'll see a number pad. Above those numbers, 1, 2, and 3, is previous page and next page. Click next page. You'll see the display has switched to showing a GPS left and right, and they should both agree. Click the soft key to the left of either GPS, and that fills the scratch pad line at the bottom of the screen with the GPS position. Now go back down by the number pad. You'll see previous and next page. Click previous. Gone back where we were. And now you need to click on the right-hand side the soft key that lines up with those blanked out IRS position squares. It is now auto-filled. At this point, the plane should know where it is. Let's look up to our display. Voila, we now have a PFD and a navigation display. So this was just a down and dirty startup of the Zibo mod Boeing 737-800. It's enough to get you taxiing around the tarmac, and you could go fly VFR like for fun, but you're going to want to watch some videos on setting up your FMC and CDU before you attempt to actually use this aircraft for a flight in the way it would be used for commercial service. So again, thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or comments, please be sure to leave us some feedback in the comments on this video. Also, if you're curious, this is a freeware KPHX Phoenix Sky Harbor Scenery Pack available on the X-Plane forum for download. is quite excellent and relatively up to date. The exception, Terminal 3 has just recently opened here at Phoenix Sky Harbor, and that's not reflected in this scenery pack, which is otherwise pretty much exactly as the real airport stands. So thank you for joining us today on FBFT, and remember, plan the flight and fly the plan. We hope to see you on board again soon.